The young woman knelt in the dust, her face streaked with blood and soot, her wrists shackled by a heavy iron chain that still reeked of the livestock pen. A tarnished padlock, it gleamed faintly at its center, worn but sturdy enough to bind her like a beast. The scoundrel who'd chained her there, he cackled, mouth full of grit and cheap bourbon. He sneered, "She came free with the mule." The blazing sun over Redstone Valley scorched the ground crimson. To them, she wasn't a person. She was a transaction. James Callahan stood watching, quiet as stone. At 56, the rancher had witnessed every shade of cruelty this land could muster, but nothing quite like this. The girl, she couldn't have been older than 20. Her skirt ripped at the hem. When the trader dangled the reins, James hesitated. The mule was scrawny, a bargain, but something in her eyes, it screamed this deal was bigger than livestock. He reached into his weathered satchel, counted out a handful of silver coins, and dropped them into the grimy trader's hand. The coins, they clinked sharply, cutting through the heavy silence, sealing a bargain he already regretted. He stepped closer. The girl flinched, chains jangling hard, her breath quick, ragged. He knelt, slipped a small brass key from the trader's belt, and asked, low and steady, why she bound like this. The man spat into the dirt. "She fights," he said, smirking. James didn't respond. He turned the key in the lock, slow, deliberate, until the rest gave way with a faint snap. He met her gaze and said softly, "I bought the mule, not you. You're free to leave." The words, they hung there, gentle but solid, like a vow she'd never heard before. The chain dropped. She didn't budge. Her wrist, it bled where the iron had cut deep. He reached for his jacket to drape over her, but she jerked back, eyes wide, voice cracking. "You already paid. Just get it over with." The world, it seemed to pause. Even the breeze held its breath. James froze, jacket half raised, guilt burning in his chest like acid. He spoke, voice calm but firm. "Miss, I didn't buy you." She didn't answer. Her eyes, they stayed glued to the dirt, braced for a blow that never came. James laid the jacket gently over her shoulders, stood and led the mule toward the tree line. After a moment, she followed, barefoot, steps uneven, the chain still clinking faintly around one wrist. When they reached the edge of the woods, the light softened through the cedars. She glanced back once at the trader, shrinking in the distance. Fear lingered in her eyes, but there was something else too, something like disbelief. Why would a man pay for her freedom when he could have owned her? And what secret was buried so deep it warranted chaining a girl like her? The next morning was still, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel heavier than it should. James Callahan woke to the scent of wood smoke and the soft ripple of water running through the stream below his cabin. The girl, she was already up, sitting by the fire, hands tucked under his jacket, the broken chain still dangling from one wrist. She hadn't spoken since the night before, not when he offered her bread, not even when he said she was safe. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin, cracked from fear and exhaustion. What happens now? James poured coffee into 2 tin mugs, sat across from her. "Now you eat," he said plainly. "I've got work to do, and you've got a choice to make. Stay or go." She blinked, puzzled. "No one's ever given me a choice before." He shrugged. "Then it's high time someone did." He studied her for a moment, and something in her eyes reminded him of his late wife. The same spark, the same fear of being trapped. Maybe that's why he couldn't walk away this time. She didn't smile, but something shifted in her gaze. For a second, she looked less like a lost soul and more like someone trying to recall what freedom felt like. She took the coffee, fingers trembling around the mug. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. James looked at her for a long beat. "I don't like seeing folks treated worse than my livestock." She flinched. James saw it, said nothing, but he noticed everything. The way she glanced over her shoulder every few minutes, the way her eyes flicked to the path like she expected someone to come charging through. That kind of fear, it doesn't fade overnight. The air, it shimmered with heat, and for the first time, she smiled, just a little. He knew better to push her too soon, but something about her felt off. The way she spoke, the way she held herself. Her words were measured, like someone taught to weigh them carefully, not the rough talk of a drifter. And when she brushed her hair aside, he caught a glimpse of a delicate silver chain around her neck, hidden under her torn blouse. It glinted in the sunlight for just a moment. James looked away, but a thought, it gnawed at him. People don't chain up strangers for nothing. Someone wanted this girl gone or found. He wasn't sure which worried him more. And if she was running from something, how long before it caught up to them both? By the third morning, she moved like she belonged. She fed the hens, swept the porch, even laughed once when the old mule snorted dust all over her skirt. For a moment, James Callahan thought maybe peace had settled back into the ranch. But peace, it never lasted long out here. The first sign of trouble, it came with the sound of hooves, steady, purposeful, the rhythm of men who didn't ride for pleasantries. James was fixing a fence when he heard it. He looked toward the ridge, saw 3 riders cutting through the heat haze, their coats dark, their horses lean and hard. The girl, she froze on the porch, her face paled, hands trembling as she clutched the chain still hanging from her wrist. She didn't need to say a word. James knew they were here for her. The man stopped at the gate. The one in the middle spat, grinned. "Mornin', rancher. Nice spread you got here." James nodded slow. "Not for sale." The man chuckled. "We ain't here for land. We're here for the girl. Slade says she bolted, owing him coin." James's jaw tightened. Slade, that same snake who'd sold him the mule, the same man who'd chained her like a beast. He wiped his hands on his trousers, stepped forward. "You tell Slade he sold me a mule, not a person." The rider's grin faded. "Then you tell Slade's pals at the marshal's office." The girl stepped forward, voice trembling. "He's lying. I don't owe him a dime." The rider's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that, Miss Harrow?" The name, it hit James like a brick. Harrow. He'd heard it before. Railroad barons from Cheyenne, the kind of wealth that could buy entire counties. He glanced at her. Her face, it told the story. That name was hers. And these men, they weren't here for debt. They were here for blood, money, or both. James didn't think. "Get inside," he said. "Quiet." She darted for the cabin as he reached for the rifle hanging by the post. The 3 riders eased their horses back, not ready to draw, but ready to make a point. The leader smirked, meaner now. "You can't hide her forever, old man." When they rode off, the silence was worse than gunfire. James stood there, rifle heavy in his hands. He didn't know much about rich men's schemes, but he knew fear. And the fear in her eyes, it wasn't of dying, it was of being found. Now he had to choose. Turn her in, or stand between her and a world that had already bought her once. If you've stuck with me this far, take a sip of your coffee, or tea, whatever's keeping you company. Tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it there? And while you're thinking, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming. Because the next part of this story, that's where the real trouble starts. The air, it grew thick that night. Even the crickets, they fell silent. James sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, eyes on the tree line, waiting for trouble to slink back from the shadows. Inside, the girl sat by the fire, staring at a thin silver chain she'd finally pulled from under her blouse. It held a small locket, etched with an H at its center. When he stepped inside, she looked up, quick, like she'd been caught with stolen goods. "I was going to tell you," she said softly. "I just didn't know how." James nodded slow. "Start with your name, the real one." She took a shaky breath. "Clara Jane Harrow. My father owns Harrow & Sons, the biggest railroad company in Cheyenne." Her voice, it wavered. "They wanted me to marry a man I didn't know. a deal to merge two empires. I refused. So my father's men, they locked me in the house until the wedding. I ran. Slade's men caught me before I crossed the border. They chained me, hid me with the livestock, sold me off, thought no one would care. James sat across from her. The firelight danced across the scars on her wrists. He spoke, finally. You don't have to be afraid here. Her eyes welled up. I'm not afraid of them anymore. I'm afraid you'll send me back. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't send folks where they don't want to go. The next morning, the sun rose sharp over the valley. Clara helped make breakfast, quieter than before, but lighter somehow. James said they'd ride to town, talk to the preacher, maybe the law about Slade. She nodded, but worry clouded her face. Slade's got friends, she said. Some wear badges. James gave a faint smile. Then I'll bring my rifle. They rode down the dirt path toward Ironwood, the world stirring awake around them. Halfway there, they passed a weathered telegraph pole, a paper nailed to it. James slowed the horse. It was a wanted poster, ink still fresh. He read aloud slow. Wanted. For theft and fraud. Reward, $500. He shook his head. They'll say anything for $1. Across the top, in bold letters, Wanted. Clara Jane Harrow. She stared, breath gone. James tore the poster down without a word and stuffed it into his coat. We keep riding, he said, calm as ever. She nodded, but her hand, it trembled on the reins. Now tell me, what would you do if you found a girl like that, chained to your past? Would you ride on or turn back before it's too late? They reached Ironwood at dusk. The sky burned gold, and the faint sound of a fiddle drifted from the tavern. Clara rode beside James, hat low, face dusted with trail dirt. They'd been riding all day, words sparse. James stopped near the small chapel at the end of the town. He looked at her, said softly, We can go to the sheriff, tell the truth, or we can keep riding till the world forgets your name. She stared at the chapel bell, swaying in the breeze. Her voice, a whisper. I don't want to be found. I just want to live. He nodded, no judgment in his eyes. The night before, by the fire, Clara had spoken, quietly. If we marry, my name changes. They can't claim me as Harrow anymore. James had stared into the flames. Only if it's what you want, Clara. I won't force you. She smiled, fearless for the first time. I want it. Inside the chapel, the preacher looked up from his worn Bible, startled to see strangers so late. James set a few coins on the table. We need a marriage record, he said. The preacher hesitated, eyed their faces. This ain't just paper, is it? James nodded once. It's real to us, preacher. That's enough. When the bell tolled, Clara was no longer a fugitive. She was Mrs. Clara Callahan. They left town before first light. The road back through Sagebrush Canyon, it shimmered with morning mist. Clara rode behind him, arms around his waist, head against his back. Her fingers, they tightened when the horse stumbled, an old reflex, born of fear. But she held on. Some nights she still woke trembling, crying at shadows only she could see. James would hold her until dawn crept through the cabin's cracks. Healing takes time, he'd say, but we're getting there. Not because the world had changed, but because she was starting to believe she could. Weeks passed. The ranch, it bloomed again. The fields greened, the hens fattened, and laughter. It returned to the porch. Clara learned to mend fences, milk the mule, bake bread from scratch. James would sit on the steps, watching her hum in the afternoon light. He never said it, but in her, he'd found something he didn't know he'd lost. A month later, James sent a letter to the federal marshal in Laramie. Slade was caught, trafficking women along the rail lines. The news spread. quietly, but far. The chains, they stopped rattling in Clara's dreams. Hope. One evening, she stood by the creek, the same one that ran past the livestock pen where they'd met. The sunset, it turned the water amber. She whispered, "I thought I was broken. Turns out, I was just waiting to be seen." James smiled. "You were always whole, Clara. The world, it just didn't know how to see you." And maybe that's what this story is about. Second chances, a love not dressed in fancy words, but in kindness, patience, and the courage to stay. So, tell me, if you got a second chance, would you take it? Would you forgive the world for what it did and start again? If you've stayed with me through this, thank you. Take a sip of your coffee. Breathe. Remember, healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to grow again. If this story moved you, give it a like. Share it with someone who needs a spark of hope tonight. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story, it might just be the one that finds you when you need it most.